From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 42. We're going to deviate from our normal guest model today, and instead we're going to rock a Q&A. We got really good questions from some of our listeners on an Instagram poll recently, so we're going to dive into the reader mailbag just a little bit as we attack a few subjects from skill development and strength conditioning. Dakota Herman's here to help out with today, so we're in for a real treat. If you want to develop faster and train better, you need the best gear. And with that said, we've got some really exciting news for you. The number one baseball brand in the world, Rawlings, has partnered with us at Cressey Sports Performance to make getting the best training gear for you more affordable. Simply head to rawlings.com and use the coupon code Cressey20, that's CRESSEY 20 at checkout, and you'll save 20% off your order. This offer is only valid on select items, but there's a ton of great gear you'll save 20% on that will help you become a better player. So shop now. Again, that's rawlings.com, RAWLINGS.com, and enter the coupon code Cressey20, CRESSEY 20 at checkout, and you'll get 20% off on your order of some absolutely awesome baseball gear that we use every day with our pro guys. Welcome back, everybody. As you know, we did not do a bio for today's guest because it is a Q&A that we're doing in-house, but I do think it's important that we introduce you all to the man behind the scenes, the legend Dakota Herman, who helps out with our podcast. What's up, Dakota?
What's up, you guys? Thanks for having me on, Eric.
You've been on every episode. Folks just haven't heard you. So I'm going to sing Dakota's praises. He's been a rock star behind the scenes for making sure this podcast rolls smoothly, and he makes me look way smarter than I am every week. So I appreciate all your hard work, bud.
Yeah, no worries. It feels weird being on the opposite end of this and actually talking on a phone instead of just listening to people.
Absolutely. Dakota has been an active, participant at our Massachusetts facility on both the throwing and the coaching side of things with respect to strength conditioning. So he's kind of my Swiss Army knife. But in that same vein, before we get going with some of the questions, I did want to give folks a heads up that we just announced registration for the 2020 CSP Collegiate Elite Baseball Development Program. It's an event that takes place at our Hudson, Massachusetts facility and runs from June 1st through August 8th. It's the fourth year we've run the program, and each year we've had pitchers that have moved to Massachusetts from all around the country. We expect a really good turnout of really motivated athletes who are going to push themselves and those around them to get better. And a lot of the same training opportunities and expertise that we provide to our pro crowd. To give you a little backstory for what this is, it's a great fit for pitchers who really need to prioritize development as opposed to just getting innings or exposure. So it's a great replacement for those who still need to throw but may need to put on 20 pounds, learn a new pitch, sort out aches and pains, improve their mobility, whatever it may be. So it's a good contrast to what we see with traditional summer ball experiences. And we've had some really good results over the years, and we fine-tuned the program and made it better each year. Each athlete begins with a thorough initial movement and pitching assessment that sets the stage for our individualized programming on both the throwing and strength and conditioning side of things. The programs correspond to 6 days a week of training. Generally, 4 of those 6 days are double sessions with throwing in the morning and strength conditioning in the afternoons. And really, in our throwing programs, we're going to integrate weighted ball stuff. We're going to use long toss. We're going to use, obviously, bullpens with video analysis. We do detailed pitching analytics breakdowns, ranging from spin rates, spin efficiency, spin axes, and high-speed camera stuff in these bullpens as well. We'll have opportunities for our pitchers to throw live to hitters, and we even placed some guys in the Cape Cod Baseball League late in the summer last year after they took big jumps forward, and some of those rosters had a need for participants. Every one of our athletes gets a weekly manual therapy session with our licensed massage therapist or physical therapist, and we do nutritional guidance throughout the program. So to help with recovery, guys have access to Mark Pro, NormaCheck, and red light therapy. And last but not least, but I think actually really differentiates this heavily compared compared to maybe some of the offerings in this vein that you'll see around the country. We incorporate a regular educational component to educate athletes on the why behind their training. This isn't just staff presentations, but more importantly, it's conference calls and meetings with major league players and established coaches from around the country. So, we've had Noah Syndergaard, Alan Jaeger, Kurt Schilling, Oliver Drake, Steve Cishek, over the years, who have all contributed really good stuff and done Q&A with the guys. Above all else, it takes place in a really motivating environment where, athletes can push each other to be the best they can be and, really surround themselves by people who are like-minded. So if you're interested in learning more, you can shoot an email to cspmass@gmail.com. Again, that's cspmass@gmail.com. We do cap the head count, and these do sell out every year, so you want to get on the radar screen earlier than later. So the last thing I would say is if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how it's structured, definitely check out Kyle Driscoll on episode 27. After last year's program, he went through some of the key findings and observations that he had with a lot of the pitchers that came in and talked about commonalities of success with guys who had really good outcomes there. So definitely check it out if you're interested. You can also reach out if you have more questions. So Dakota, you've been involved in it. Anything I missed?
It's pretty much the most all-inclusive program you'll be able to find for 10 weeks. And really the culture that Kyle and John and all the other staff members are able to bring to the table is really what I think separates it. And I don't think you miss anything as far as the details of it. Just the culture that's able to be built there is really remarkable. And you're missing out if you just stay at home and train at a gym and don't come.
I love it. All right, man. So that wraps up our infomercial. Let's get to the questions. And I think this is something we're going to make a regular feature because we did actually get some good questions when I posted this on my Instagram story and asked for some inquiries. So let's hit it, man.
Yeah. First one out of the pot. How would you model a 7-day rotation schedule for a college pitcher?
I love this one because it allows us to touch on a lot of different concepts.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that I would say is if you appreciate what the biggest change for a college pitcher that moves on to a pro rotation, really what they talk about is that you get used to pitching at 90%. On a 5-day rotation, it is just a constant race to recover. The difference, though, is on a 7-day rotation, you actually have a ton of time to get in high-quality work. So if you structure your week correctly, you can be really, really productive. And to be honest, I think this is actually one of the reasons why you see so many Japanese pitchers get hurt when they come to the United States, is that there's a very predictable rotation. They have the same off day every week, and guys are on 6 to 7 day rotations over there. Coming to a 5-day rotation, it presents a lot of challenges where you'll see organizations try shorter starts every 5th day, or they'll try piggybacking guys. They'll try guys on 6-day rotations to adjust them. But in the college 7-day rotation, we can do some awesome stuff. So when I look at these programs, my goal is always to follow a high-low model. So, this was originally kind of proposed by Charlie Francis in the sprint community, and there's some great research out there, or really more kind of layman's literature write-ups about it, where you can learn more if you're interested in digging low. But for all intents and purposes, if you look at a high-low model, you need to make sure that you have periods of high stress where you overload the system and try to create a compensatory adaptation. And then you also have periods where you back off and give people a chance to regenerate and presumably come back at a higher level of fitness or, motor learning proficiency. So, day 0. So let's say we're talking about a Friday night starter in the college game. That would be day 0. Okay. So obviously you're going to pitch. What I actually really like to do is that's a high stress day. You're going out there and throwing 110 pitches or whatever it is. I actually like to have guys do some sprint/agility stuff after the game. They're already warmed up. You don't have to do a pronounced warm up. And they can usually kind of go right to it. So, if it's running some short starts and some 60s, it's a way to consolidate stress on that day 0. And it's a different kind of stress than pitching, right? You're going to have a fatigued cuff, scapular stabilizers, all that. Whereas no one ever really complains that they can't go out and sprint. And you've seen plenty of guys in spring training in professional baseball who will make a start and then go out and, run 3 miles in the backfields or something like that. I'd rather get a really CNS intensive effort from the lower body in sprint work. And you'll understand why as we kind of lay out the entire rest of this. What I would also tell you is if you have a piece of paper in front of you, this is going to make so much more sense. So write down with me as we go through this. So on day 0, you're going to pitch and then sprint. So that would be Friday, if it's a Friday night starter. So day 1, the day after, From a throwing standpoint, some guys like to play catch the next day, get their arm moving. Other guys like to take it off altogether. I feel like it's a very individual thing. That regardless is going to be a low stress day from a pitching standpoint. And what I like to do is I like to pair it up with some mobility circuits. So the goal is if day 0 is really, really crazy, day 1 is going to be a back off day where we're going to have a good recharge. This is something we've done in the past. Mike Soroka is one of our pro guys who likes to lift right after his start on a 5-day rotation, so he can have kind of a low-key day 1. Corey Kluber's lifted after his day 0 start in the past as well. So the goal is use day 1 to feel as good as you possibly can. What do I like to do on that? Mobility circuits, some light aerobic base work can be great. I'm not a big fan of distance running, but this may be a day where a guy wants to get on the bike a little bit or elliptical, just move around. I know guys that like to get in the pool and do some easy, kind of underwater running or, kind of swimming. Basically, the intensity should be really, really low, and you should leave the sessions on this day 1 feeling refreshed. This is also a crucial day for me, particularly with stiffer athletes, where we want to take that next day and use it as an opportunity to regain lost range of motion. So if you're a guy who, loses shoulder flexion and elbow extension, this is the day to get in and, see your athletic trainer, see a massage therapist or a PT, someone who can put their hands on you and really help to restore that range of motion and help you bounce back. So when you have that low after your high on day 0, it sets you up for day 2 being a really good workload day. So what we look at on day 2 is that's a day to stretch out your long toss a little bit more. Some guys like to go to 120, some guys like to go to 270. It's a very individual thing depending on how you're feeling. So I like the Alan Jaeger mindset of kind of like taking your arm for a walk and seeing how it feels on a given day. And then after you've done your throwing for the day, get in a good lower body lift. So we're going to have a really stressful day 2. So we're going to get after it. This is your big workload day in the weight room. And it kind of starts this block. So what I look at is I look at day 2 and day 3 as a combined high block. So in the context of a 7-day rotation with a guy who throws on a Friday night, that's going to be Sunday into Monday, right? So you're going to long toss and lower body on Sunday. On Monday, you're going to push your long toss and your weighted ball stuff a lot harder if you're a weighted ball guy. And then you're going to get in like an upper body lift. So we go back-to-back lifting. And the idea really simply there is, we're setting the stage for a low-key day 4. So that's our second low in this cycle. So if you're a Friday starter, basically push it hard on Sunday, Monday. So Tuesday is going to be a little bit more mellow. Play catch if you want to, take it off if you feel like you need the day. And then that's a day where I like to do what we call micro dosing of our sprint work. So it's a lot of short sprints, change the directions, not a lot of long distance stuff, almost like a little bit of like a neural charge workout where you're just priming somebody, but then, pulling back on the reins in terms of how much they actually do. So on that day, it might be the kind of thing where you do some skipping, some side shuffling, some karaoke, stuff like that. And then run 6 to 8 15-yard accelerations, where you're just doing some starts. And then they go and they play catch right afterwards. And that's the day. And so that's our low day. And then on day 5, we do another kind of borderline high day. I'd call it like a moderate/high, where they would throw their bullpen. I like that because it puts you 48 hours out from your start. So it kind of shortens the learning loop. And you get a full body lift in. What I try to do in that training session is be a little bit more concentric in nature. So that means we pick exercises that aren't going to necessarily have a high propensity to making athletes sore. So maybe we push the sled, we do some deadlifts for speed. Maybe we, do a little bit of med ball stuff. We might do some Turkish get-ups. But the last thing we're going to do there is do like, tons of pull-ups and dumbbell benches and things like that. It's more about getting athletes moving. And creating a little bit of a stimulus to keep them going. So that's kind of like a moderately high, but not the most crazy high you can imagine. Day 6, which would be the day before your start, individual preference. Some guys like to do nothing. Some guys like to just play catch. I know guys on pro ball who like to do some, quick short sprints, just move it around. And then obviously day 7 is pitch again. So if you look at how it's all structured, day 0 is high. Day 1 is low. Day 2/3 are high. Day 4 is low. Day 5 is moderately high. Day 6 is low. And then you're back at it, hopefully feeling good to go out and dominate on day 7. So, again, that looks a lot prettier if you write it all out and plan it out yourself. And obviously there's exercise selection components, but hopefully that all made sense.
No, that's awesome. And I think too that especially for college pitchers, most of the people that are going to be asking this question are guys just looking to do more. Mm-hmm. I think just for just young athletes understanding what a high-low model really does is going to help people. Because you always hear like guys wanting to do as much as they can in between their starts to feel better and feel prepared. And sometimes it's understanding less is more, and you just need to check all these boxes. And it's really nice to have a layout for them.
And I would also even add, like, don't wait to feel crappy before you deload. So what I'll do with guys is, if you're big weighted balls guys and you're pushing it hard on day 3, that might be a day where we pull back on weighted balls. Every 4th week we just bang it. And maybe instead of taking it out to 300 in your long toss, you go out and just, you play catch to 180 on the line. Maybe you pare back on the number of pull down throws on the way back in. Maybe you shorten up the flat ground you throw before you get off your mound. Like there's a million different ways you can fluctuate training stress, drop, the amount of volume you do in the weight room by, 40%. What I also look at is like, how do you deload, right? If you're a really experienced athlete, like when I deload, like I take weight off the bar. Like I'll actually keep volume up, but drop intensity. I'm a little bit older and I've been lifting heavy stuff long enough that I feel like my joints are the things that probably need the break the most. Whereas if you have an 18-year-old kid who walked into college who had no training experience, his deload might just be like, hey, let's reduce the total number of sets and reps, but let's keep the intensity high. Let's push the load because you can still continue to gain strength and all that. But, as you work through this stuff, it's for some guys, it'll be less volume, but I would actually argue for a lot of guys, it's more than they thought they could do. So the biggest thing I'll tell you is make sure you're monitoring body weight. Like check to see if you're keeping your weight up sufficiently, or if it's, more workload than you've ever gotten. But, that's basically kind of like 2.5 to 3 lifts per week, as well as 2 sprint sessions. And you also have to keep in mind that you're effectively doing a little bit of light sprint work during every warm up before every catch play session. And then the other thing we didn't even really talk about is where do you put your arm care on those days? So, we'll put in more of our heavy manual stuff. On the upper body day, we'll do more rhythmic stabilizations, 90-90 holds, on some of our, like our full body day and our lower body days. And then, on a daily basis, you can hit some rhythmic stabilizations. You can do some low level motor control stuff. So over the course of the week, you hit your total. But what I very rarely do is say, all right, we're going to do 45 minutes of arm care on these 2 days. It's all worked into what we're trying to see.
Mm-hmm. No, that's awesome. And I think, yeah, like you were saying, I mean, just like you can pick and choose and really just tweak your schedule to really achieve the goal that you need. And that's to feel the best you can every 7 days. So, I mean, you said arm care, sprints, like changing all this stuff is going to really be helpful. And if guys just follow this, they can really find a 7-day routine for them. So that's awesome.
I like it.
The next question we got is actually from a elite baseball development program attendee himself. Shout out to Drake Gongwer for sending this one in.
Good man. Great fisherman.
Great
Impressive.
fisherman. Brought his boat to Massachusetts.
Great
actually.
fishing resume and a good splitter too.
That's awesome. The question is, are there any risks or specific considerations for using blood flow restriction bands while lifting as a pitcher?
Absolutely. This is, I think, maybe the best question I've gotten, and this is the perfect medium in which to kind of describe it. So here's what I'll tell you is nerves don't like to be compressed and they don't like to be stretched. So what we realize is if you talk about nerves in the upper extremity, right, they all originate on your brachial plexus, which runs from C5 to T1 on your neck. So after those come off your nerve roots, they run right past your scalenes, right? So if you look at thoracic outlet surgery, usually they do what's called a scalenectomy. So they'll remove some of those tissues to allow things to glide a little freer. After they go past your scalenes, they shoot inferiorly. They go underneath your clavicle and above your first rib. You've also got a small muscle called your subclavius that bunches things up. So there's a really small area for them to pass through. Then they shoot a little bit more laterally. They go underneath your pec minor, the short end of your biceps, and your coracobrachialis as those attach on the front of your scapula on something called your coracoid process. Then all those nerves go into the front of your shoulder, basically where they can mechanically be impinged, on your subscap. They can, basically get banged up if your rotator cuff control isn't good and your humeral head kind of jumps forward and beats up, on those nerves as they pass through the front of your shoulder. And then they shoot in a lot of different places, right? So your ulnar nerve obviously goes more posteriorly past your triceps as it runs down onto the inside of your elbow. Your musculocutaneous nerve goes to your biceps. So they shoot all over the place. And what we realize is there's a lot of places. You don't need to remember that anatomy, but you have to realize there's a lot of places where nerves can be compressed, whether that's because of faulty movement patterns, whether it's because of acquired tissue density or muscle bulk. So we have to be really, really cognizant of not creating a scenario where those nerves are more compressed. And what we see, though, unfortunately, is in the throwing motion, nerves are violently stretched. As you lay your arm back and manipulate the baseball and go through rapid elbow flexion to extension, there are a lot of nerves that are tensioned from your neck all the way down to your fingertips. So one of the things that can be challenging is they're often beaten up by the nature of throwing, and that's why we see so many distal nerve problems. Particularly if you have scenarios where, if your UCL is insufficient, your ulnar nerve is much more exposed. If you have, flexor tendinopathy where the tissue is really, really fibrotic and nasty, your flexor carpi ulnaris is where your ulnar nerve actually penetrates in the forearm. So that can be a mechanical model. So there's a lot of places where things can get snagged. And the throwing motion puts a lot of those nerves in really challenging places. So this is one of the reasons why I think you have to tread really, really lightly when you integrate blood flow restriction training in the upper extremity. We know a lot of pitchers, if you look at every case of thoracic outlet, usually what happens is they go and they throw, the adrenaline wears off, and they wake up, maybe in the middle of the night or just an hour after their outing, and their arm is swollen and purple with a blood clot. So it happens after the fact when that residual swelling is in place. So you have to be very careful from both a nerve and a vascular standpoint. Certainly there's some great research on blood flow restricted training, from everything from hormonal benefits to tissue specific adaptations for recovery and all that stuff. But I think what we need to be very, very careful of is who we use them in. So if you have an athlete who's got a history of nerve symptoms, you have an athlete that constantly complains of being tight, neck symptoms, triceps tendinopathy, a lot of that stuff. Those are the ones that for me are big red flags. I can think of one particular example of an athlete who had what we would call a subluxating ulnar nerve. So he had a nerve that moved back and forth over his medial epicondyle as he went from flexion to extension while throwing. And he actually came in to see my business partner Shane and I. Shane's an amazing manual therapist, and when we actually kind of took a step back, we asked him, hey, when does this bother you the most? I notice it the most when I throw my curveball. And what we kind of really did was Shane, from a soft tissue standpoint, really flossed it out. So figured out all the areas of compression that he could have. So he treated, scalenes, he treated subclavius, he treated subscap, pec minor, all of those. And then what we did was we actually dug a little bit deeper to ask him what his training was like. And one of the things that he commented on was that he was using the VersaClimber in blood flow restriction cuffs after every start. So he was basically a guy who was compressing a nerve that was already kind of cranky because it was subluxating back and forth over that medial epicondyle. So, obviously taking away that was a good move, and it helped to settle his symptoms down in conjunction with the manual therapy. And he did some nerve flossing as a follow-up. But we also noticed a lot of scapular control issues with him. So, he kind of layered maybe, incorrect training practices for him on top of some biomechanical compensations from faulty movement patterns and all that. So you really have to look at it very holistically. Some people can be a great candidate for this, and certainly in the general population, BFR has a lot of merit. So there's, probably fewer concerns there. But I would tell you, when we, looking at the lower extremity versus the upper extremity, by all means, throw blood pressure cuffs on like thighs and, blast your quads as much as you want. We've seen some amazing stuff with ACL patients who need to get back some quad girth after they've, gone through surgery and are a little bit limited there. But you just got to be really, really cautious in throwing shoulders, because they go through really, really dangerous situations and an unnatural act every time they play baseball. So we just need to be cognizant of not exacerbating things.
No, yeah, that's a crazy story actually about the one client you've had down in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, it's another one of those examples of it depends. Just
Yeah.
like it keeps coming up. But
Yeah. And what I would say too is, if you're going to use it, by all means use it. Start with a lower pressure, right? Don't aggressively compress. Obviously follow the guidelines for how much compression you should get as you work through there, but also integrate it gradually, right? Maybe it's once a week, once between starts or something like that if you are going to utilize it, but be very careful about aggressive wraps, and be very careful in particular about doing it in areas where nerves are exposed. So probably not a great idea to wrap directly around your elbow, because we both know, anyone who's ever whacked their funny bone knows your ulnar nerve is really, really exposed.
it's right there.
I personally, I have ulnar nerves that subluxate on both sides. So they'll pop around, and, it's kind of like a cool party trick, but I also know that I'm more susceptible to, basically ulnar neuritis. So for me, that means be careful about how many heavy chin-ups I do, and whenever I get really, really aggressive with throwing with our guys and, think I'm a rock star and I can long toss with the pro guys 2 or 3 days a week, invariably I do get a little bit flared up.
No, most definitely.
Yeah.
No one should definitely be putting on blood flow restriction cuffs and long tossing. That's for sure. That's one
Yeah.
thing we could for sure say from this.
Leave it out. Leave it out.
All right, our last one is actually pretty close to my heart, just because I've dropped a little sidearm lately
I like
in
it.
my own pitching. But third question is, what does a submariner have to do differently in workouts and training?
It's a great question, because I think the assumption is that we're talking about arm action, right? And so, yes, they face a lot of the same perils, but if you actually slow things down and examine joint angles, you'll see that shoulder and elbow positioning for most of these guys, particularly the submarine guys, is very similar to what you see in true overhand throwers, guys at 3/4 slots. But what the difference is how much lateral trunk tilt they have. So obviously the more trunk tilt you have, the lower the release point. And I put an example up on my Instagram, I don't know, probably a couple months ago, right at the start of the off season. It compared Oliver Drake and Adam Simber. So Adam Simber is the ultra submarine guy. He has the lowest vertical release height in all of baseball. And then I actually put it side by side with Oliver Drake, who's one of our guys. So Oliver has a ton of lateral trunk tilt away from his arm side. So as a right-handed pitcher, what's interesting about Oliver is I believe he throws like an 1155 spin axis four seam. So
yeah, it's like he's a lefty.
Yeah, exactly. Traditionally, right-handed pitchers will throw basically a four seam between a 12 and a 1, and a lefty will throw it between an 11 and a 12. So Oliver is actually so trunk tilted away from his arm side that he throws from basically a left-handed slot. What's interesting though is if you put Oliver and Adam and you tinker with the pitchers and line them up, Adam has much more of a conventional arm slot. He throws from almost like a true 3/4, whereas Oliver has a lower arm slot and a substantially higher vertical release angle. So the thing I would tell you is, in this discussion of sidearm submarine guys, really what you have to do is you have to first take away all trunk tilt and look what's really, really happening from an arm action standpoint, right? So a guy who throws from a very high slot is going to need more scapular upward rotation. He's going to need more lat length to get to that position. A guy who throws from a lower slot is probably going to be able to get away with a little bit less of a mobile shoulder. So he has a little bit more wiggle room to work with. With that said, there is a little bit of research. There's actually a study that came out in 2009 in the American Journal of Sports Medicine. The lead author was Aguinaldo, and the article was titled "Correlation of Throwing Mechanics with Elbow Valgus Load in Adult Baseball Pitchers." And in this study, they actually had a pretty good sample size. It was like 69 adult baseball players, and 14 pitchers were a sidearm action. And they did show that a sidearm action, so that's a lower slot, not just lateral trunk tilt. They showed that there were higher elbow valgus torques than we saw when overarm slot position. So, which isn't altogether surprising, right? When we consider what we know about, like, if the elbow is inside 90 degrees, as we lay our arm back, there generally tends to be less valgus stress. So that if you're in a sidearm position, you're not going to be anywhere near that point. So you probably are throwing the UCL in a little bit more of a dangerous position. The trade-off, though, is remember that guys that throw from those slots usually throw with lower velocities. So you're reducing the force aspect of things to some degree. So, it's probably a give and a take, but, generally speaking, a true sidearm delivery will be a little bit less elbow friendly. But when it comes to actually modifying things for their training, I think the bigger question is, how do you manage true, like, submarine guys from a core control standpoint? Just because they're going to have a lot more lateral trunk tilt. So they're going to need more time on core stability, working to iron out excessive right-left asymmetries that arise secondary to all that lateral trunk tilt. So in other words, I think you have to worry about the spine as much as you do around the arm, as a really gross generalization for this scenario.
Almost. I mean, I think even it's interesting to see how the hips work on guys that actually have to drop down too. As much trunk tilt as they have, the timing of like them getting into like back leg hip extensions just a little bit different too, and how they actually use their lower half to create momentum down the slope.
And we talk a lot about it. Yeah, I mean, you think about right-handed pitchers, right? if you're a guy who tends to drift dramatically towards the third base dugout, the direction in your delivery is not going to be great. So as a submariner, the natural tendency is, because your center of mass is projecting towards third base, to create that, it becomes very hard to create a true hip load that gives you the correct direction of the plate. So you get a lot of momentum that tends to drift you towards basically the third base batter's box as a right-handed submarine pitcher. And what that really does, it makes it very hard to get into your front hip, because you effectively have to reorient yourself. So those guys, they need to have unreal, basically hip mobility into their lead hip. They've got to have a glove side that's really well timed up to get them back on time. Certainly they're sacrificing velocity for some deception and, some funky movement and all that side of things. But that direction from the back hip can't be overstated. Now, when you drop down, would you consider yourself a true sidearm, or would you consider yourself a slightly lower traditional slot?
I would say that I've fully embraced the sidearmer I am, because I was tinkering on low 3/4, but I'm there now. I'm sidearm. I'm embracing the trunk tilt and watching Steve Cishek late at night trying to learn. So
did you just officially confess to being a crafty lefty in front of thousands of people?
I did. Honestly, it took Quinn Cleary had to make fun of me enough times in the birdcage being a sidearmer for me to finally embrace the fact that I am a crafty lefty who throws sidearm. He doesn't throw 95. So
you just got 1,000 times more quirky, in my eyes. But I respect the hustle. What did you notice as you made that adjustment? Because I've heard stories about all kinds of different things. Just seeing relievers go to become starters. Was it a different level of soreness for you in different positions as you got going towards it?
Yeah, I was going to say it really started when I had elbow surgery 2 years ago. Just coming back, I was super over the top and trying to be safe mechanically. And I remember one day, Kyle was just like, "Hey man, why don't you just try getting your hand away from your head?" And it just felt better. I felt like the ball was coming out of my hand better. And it was when we looked at the radar gun and stuff like that. So it was, I say, a combination of just how things felt and then how I felt after throwing that just made me really want to do it. It makes more sense with how my body moves and how I'm able to actually use the rest of my body throwing. I can't do the whole lean away from my body like Drake and throw over the top. So I might as well use what I can and be a sidearm slinger. So,
and I think there's definitely a smaller margin for error with those guys. I know Steve, his podcast, I think it was the third one or second one, I can't remember. He talked very openly about it's a game of absolute millimeters with his slider, because you very quickly can get around the baseball instead of being through the baseball if you're not careful from that lower slot. So, it's one of the reasons sidearmers, I feel are like knuckleballers. They have to stick together because the movement is unique, and there's so many places where it can effectively go wrong.
Yeah. So even as much as there is a bigger room for error, I do feel like it gave me an actual identity too as a pitcher. I know when I was kind of 3/4, I was a slurve, bad changeup guy, and now I can actually I feel like I can throw a slider and have a confident second and third pitch and a changeup just from that arm slot. I think that makes a big difference for guys to end up dropping down. Maybe they're just more consistent and can actually be deceptive with a sinker slider like Cishek is. Where before that, they were almost trying to find who they were and were effectively just average at maybe one or two things. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, this has been awesome, man. And we got to do it again. This is a lot of fun. We actually have some more questions in the well that we'll have to use for a future podcast. But
no, most definitely. We'll have to mix in a couple of these.
Absolutely. Awesome. You're a stud, Dakota. Appreciate you taking the time. Folks, if you're interested in learning more about the summer development program, again, drop us an email at cspmass@gmail.com. I also posted a blog post on my website on January 12th when we announced it, so you can check that one out as well. And we'll look forward to doing this again soon. Thanks, Dakota.
Yep, no worries.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.